Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder of Air Manual, and I'm joined by my co-founder and co-host, Paddy Van. Good morning, Paddy.
Good morning.
Good morning. So this morning we're going to be talking about checklists and how to create ones that the team really love. Let's start with why that's important. When should we be using checklists?
Good question. What's the answer? So when should you use checklists? Well, basically for any kind of guidance that you want to give your team, the checklist should be your starting point. And we've covered this in other episodes, but we're talking about any kind of task, that you want to be able to delegate, that you want people to be able to practically find out how they're going to do, anything from sending an invoice or doing a demo, or I'm giving the same examples on every episode. I need to come up with some new ones. So doing reviews, repurposing podcasts, still coming up with the same ones. But yeah, you get the idea. Any task in the business can be captured as a checklist, but it's not just those tasks, those SOPs. So SOPs being standard operating procedures, which are essentially the same thing. It's also the training, and your onboarding can also be checklists. And obviously not a in-person training, but a lot of your training can be self-service. And this is in today's world, particularly with everyone working remotely and being agile, having checklist-based training that they can do as and when they need it is fantastic. There are going to be times where you need in-person coaching and so on, but for a lot of training, it can be done that way. And we would go further on onboarding and say that your onboarding should be self-service. It allows you to bring in new team members at any point in the year. It allows them to go at their own pace. It allows them to work at their own speed. We've found that it's known that people have different ways of learning. Some need to go really deep into each area. Other people are happy to skim and come back, and it allows them to do that. So yeah, we use checklists for pretty much everything we want to do in terms of delegating and let people follow those steps. And it's so important because checklists are just way more effective than the alternative of just giving a kind of a guidance document that they could read through.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's interesting. I'm currently, as you know, Paddy, I'm currently on essentially a business retreat with a load of other business owners, and I've been helping them, tackle some of their biggest issues. What's really interesting is that there's a risk or a temptation of business owners and leaders generally to see documentation and creation of checklists, SOPs, etc., as a sort of, oh well, that's not strategic. As a result, it's a tactical thing. As a result, I shouldn't be doing that. I need to be delegating that, or someone else should be doing that. I'll get my PA to do it, or maybe an ops person or whatever. And I think the mistake is that they actually lose a lot of power from doing that, right? Because as you just described, there are so many things that it's useful for to be turning into checklists, including things like tasks you want to delegate. And if you're a business owner or a leader, you need to be handing over things that you're doing, and you need to be delegating. You need to be getting those things across to other people. And I think it's funny that the temptation of the business leader to think, structure, I'll give that to someone else, actually disempowers them to be able to free up their time, to be able to get consistent results from their team, to be able to grow their team and onboard them and train them, as you say, in a way that doesn't derail the team and slow it down when things are busy, which is exactly when you're needing to hire. And I think it's funny that this becomes it's seen as a tactical area, but actually is so useful as a tool in the same way as, we don't delegate something like exercise to other people and say, oh, well, that's a doing thing, so I'll have other people do that. Like, that's a thing that is useful for you, not just for physical, but for mental energy and so on. And so I think people need to understand that it is a tool you can use to help you get better, more consistent results, and particularly from others and for your team, right?
Completely agree. The bit that you got there, I love it. It's a personal tool as much as something. It's not something that you can delegate all the way down. If you are trying to delegate your own tasks, which as a business leader is something you need to do, this is a skill that you need in your tool belt, because it is the most the quickest and most effective way to get something documented in a form that you can then hand over. Something I'll add is, often when you think about documenting, you're not going to go, okay, I need to hand over this task. And we covered yesterday the instinct is I'll just do it in a meeting because I can say everything I need to and so on. And we say, no, the person you're delegating to needs something to refer to later. When we think about documentation, we often have the wrong concepts in our head about what that documentation should be. And it's not just for delegating a task. It's the same problem that people have when they think about how to document their company or team or widely. And they think about documentation essentially like they're building a company encyclopedia. And why? Well, I mean, they've literally got a wiki, and a wiki, what do you use it for? Wikipedia. So it's a company encyclopedia. So we'll have a page on every little subject that might be useful. And it's a beautiful concept, but it's like, unless you've got tens of millions of pounds to fund this thing to keep it up to date, because basically anything you write in it is going to go out of date within 10 minutes. It's a fool's errand. It's not what you need. Instead of an encyclopedia, you need a manual, a tactical way of going in and finding how to do specific tasks. And when you change that metaphor from I'm creating long form documents to I'm creating a manual, and it's a series of checklists that allow people to perform individual tasks, then you've got something on your tool belt as a leader, as anyone in the organization, where you can create something which is really valuable and useful immediately to the rest of the company, and which doesn't go into the encyclopedia area of documenting the entire history for every decision that's led up to that point. It's just the useful stuff. And it's amazing.
I love that. In fact, it reminds me, I love that, and I think it reminds me of, I was talking to a business owner last night who, it was really interesting. He was basically sharing sequentially all the things, like all the barriers in his head to doing this stuff. It was kind of like Alexis, I know I need to do this stuff, but here's what's holding me back. And it was really interesting. I literally ended up like chatting and writing it down with him and so on. And there were various ones, but one of the one pointed to that point around thinking you need to create your encyclopedia was, he said, I feel like I just need to get it all done and then it'll be easier to maintain. And by getting it all done, he literally meant like create the encyclopedia of the business and then I'll maintain it, right? And so then it's like, well, if you get it's like, it's a little bit like, if you need to lose weight, we'll just get all of that done in a week. Like we'll do all the extra rather than let's have a personal trainer, meeting like once a week and 7 minutes of exercise every morning. And so we'll just get it all done. we'll do like a year's worth of exercise in 1 week. That'll get the weight down, and then it'll be easy to keep off, right? And so I think that mentality, that mindset shift needs to happen to, instead, rather than try and create the encyclopedia for the whole business, it's about creating a checklist for specific things that need to be addressed and move over. So I absolutely love that. So let's say that we've got a business owner who's going, right, I'm currently spending too much time in the business. I'm doing admin, I'm sending invoices, I'm doing quotes, I'm perhaps whether it's having sales conversations. There's a variety of things that they might be doing in the business. And we'll pick that as an area rather than go down the training and onboarding route, which we could. But let's say that they're doing that. What are the most important bits to get right when creating a great checklist? Because we've both seen it, that it's not an automatic thing to suddenly create something that is easy for other people to follow and therefore use consistently and to improve and make changes to, and all these sorts of things. So what are the most important things for them to get right?
Yeah, you're right there. It's the steps we're going to describe. They're not at all complicated, but they're so easy to get wrong if you're not in the habit of doing this. If you haven't done it, 100 times before, or even a few times before, once you've seen it, you go, oh, and it changes anything. I was the same talking to another business leader that when was it last week, and they went from just being kind of everything we've done in documentation isn't working, and then something clicked in one of the conversations, and they started using checklists and started getting some of these bits right, and it's just like, oh my goodness, this solves what was previously insurmountable, and it's really simple things. So the first one, it's that title. It's the title of your document, and it's the one where every time that we watch a new lead coming in and talking to us and trying to do it for the first time, even when they've had the guidance, their natural instinct is to name the document about the subject which the document is about. And so you have a document which is called invoices or architecture or podcast or whatever. And there's unfortunately,
or even sales process, right? Like, and it feels like, well, what's wrong with that? Like, I'm essentially creating checklists that relate to my sales process. Therefore, why can't I just call this sales process?
Well, yeah. And of course, there's a number of reasons. It's like, okay, let's say you've got one called podcast or sales process. If I've got that, what's in that document? Like, honestly, like for podcasts, it could be about our podcast, someone else's podcast. It could be about creating the podcast or repurposing the podcast. It could be for the people, me and Alex, who are on the podcast about what we need to do, or it could be something which is for the team who are repurposing and publishing it afterwards. You're left clueless. And with sales process, it's like sales process, unless that literally covers the end-to-end thing and someone can go in and find it, but it's difficult. It's not clear who it's for, exactly what they're going to find in it, and if they need to do a specific kind of part of that process, then they're going to struggle to find that document.
Yeah.
And so how do you turn that around? Yeah, how do you turn around is you need to be thinking about the task that you are going to be writing a checklist for, and so it's not podcast, it's plan the next podcast episode or repurpose the podcast. And suddenly, for me, planning the podcast episode, that's a task that I do. Alexis knows he doesn't need to worry about it. I know exactly where I need to go for the document. I know exactly what needs to go, the steps that are involved in planning. And so you've suddenly got this very clear scope of what's in there. It makes it really easy for the right person to find. It makes it really easy for to then work out what you need to put in that document. If you have this broad scope, then you literally just go, oh, maybe this should be in here as well. Maybe this should be in here as well, and it becomes your encyclopedia. And so instead, it becomes easy to create, easy to find, and then easy to use because it's so focused. That title is probably the biggest, most common mistake we see from the start, and probably the most important step to get right because it makes all the other steps much, much easier.
Yeah, I completely agree. And making it action orientated, making it clear what's the outcome that you want. As you say, like, it makes it so much easier to create as well as find and follow and so on. And of course, I'd welcome people if you want to practice this, because this is a skill that it's a little bit like, I was thinking, this whole area, it's a little bit like time management. It's a tool that you use and that you want your team to be able to use to be able to free up their time and or improve the quality of what's being done and get people at speed and so on. And so it's a skill and it's a muscle you need to build. So post in the comments below or send us a message with what are some of the titles of the documents that you're creating or you feel like you need to create. We'll happily provide feedback on, like, okay, here's how you can make that even more useful to you, because once you've cracked it, it's then easy. But it's the understanding of why it matters and the nuance, that's the complex thing that's taken us literally years to get to. So that's awesome. So, okay, so let's say we've got our action-oriented title. So rather than podcast, instead it's prepare for next podcast. What's next, the most important?
Well, then we need to list out the steps that are involved in that checklist. And so you want to get them out of your brain. What are all the end-to-end steps to do that? And because we've got this clear title and scope, that becomes much, much, much easier. But you may still have quite a long list. The really important thing here is that each step also needs to be action-oriented. It's so common that we help people with the title and they go, yeah, okay, it's going to be publish a podcast. And then the first step says YouTube. You're like,
Yeah.
What does YouTube mean? Does it mean signing up to YouTube? Does it mean
Logging in,
posting to your YouTube? Does it mean looking on your phone? I don't know. And it's like, to them, it's just like, well, you have to post to YouTube, so I'll put the word YouTube there, and then you have to. And it's like, no. Make it super clear. Describe the action. If it's posting to YouTube, then put that. If it's posting a short video like YouTube Shorts, then post to YouTube Shorts. Sometimes you might realize, oh yeah, actually there's 2 steps there, not just the one YouTube thing. You might identify, actually there's 3 or 4 that I should bring to that top level to make it really clear what's going on. So same as the action-oriented title, the steps then need to be just as clear. So you can follow it as you would if you were to imagine the manual for how to fix something in your car. You need each of those steps to be really clear, and it'll be the title of that step in bold writing. It's that bit that you want to make sure is clear every time.
Yeah, I love that. And, again, it's an area that has taken a long time for us to get to the point of really understanding and why this is important and so on. But I remember, back when I was a management consultant doing processes for big companies and mapping it out, the phrase that we were kind of taught was verb noun. So the doing word and then the object. So rather than invoices, which would just be a noun, instead it's send an invoice. So it's like the verb being sending and then the noun being the invoice. I always find that useful. So like for example, as YouTube doesn't tell you anything, whereas if it's post, being the verb, and like a video on YouTube and given that context is valuable. But I love that point around it makes it easier for you to realize, oh, actually this is then 2 steps and needs breaking out. And also it helps you think about the transition, because you're thinking about like, okay, I've posted a video on YouTube, like you're then thinking, well, that's where I am now, and therefore if the next step is like post a long video on another platform, post it here, whatever, and then later on you're like post a short on YouTube, it's like, well, actually, would it make more sense for me to do that while I'm still at YouTube? And so it helps you even create efficiencies in your process when you're that clear. So love that, Paddy. So we've got our action-orientated title. We've got action-orientated steps that are really clear on the outcome. What next?
Cool. So you're now going to be looking at these steps and going, okay, great. I've got clear title and they can see the clear steps to do, but is it actually ready to hand over? Because I know there's some nuances where you're going to make mistakes. It's like every time that I post on YouTube, I miss this one field because it's hidden away and YouTube's a nightmare, or it's really, really important that I put this detail in, otherwise we're not going to have the business impact we expected, and it's really easy to forget. So what you want to do is add in guidance under the steps, but you are not going to write the encyclopedia article under each of those steps of everything related to it. You got to be laser. I was going to say razor, but they're definitely laser focused on working out what are the mistakes that people will definitely make, or that would have a big business impact if I didn't add those details in, and then add in just enough detail that it can be avoided. And it could be a simple warning to say, do not forget to do this, or a simple little bit of guidance. Sometimes a screenshot can help. That definitely don't go overboard. There's a tendency to add in a screenshot for everything, and that, along with, if you add too much guidance, it kills the process, because it starts taking way too long to document it and hand it over, and way too long to maintain it and keep it up to date. So later on, you're going to be able to. It's not going to be a static document. You're going to be able to add it add in more information if we find that there are other areas, but it's almost like your default should be, what's the smallest amount of additional guidance that I can give to achieve that goal, and then you want to embed it into the steps.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, as you said, the tendency is to put way too much in there, but the impact of that Because one might look at that and just say, well, what's the problem? Like, okay, so there's a bit more information than they perhaps needed, but at least it's there. And I think the problem is actually that it kind of goes back to when we talked at the start about how this should be a tool for everyone in the organization and right up to that business owner. Is the temptation is, if I need to put all the detail in, this will take so long that as a result I don't have time right now.
Yep.
And so that's what I see. Like when the business owner that I talked to last night, I was thinking, do I talk about the company? And it's like, given the context of what I'm sharing, I haven't asked permission, so I won't do that. But the interesting thing was when we then talked about, okay, so in theory, and he knew that it was kind of just a mental blocker. Like, he knows that he shouldn't really be aiming to get it all documented, like create the encyclopedia. But then you kind of ask, well, so how long is that going to take? You believe that that's an important thing. It says, I don't know, maybe like a full week, and so on. And I suspect if we had actually scoped out what he was thinking, maybe it takes longer to do the whole business, and particularly at the level that he's thinking. And of course, then it's like, well, how the hell do you prioritize that? Like, it's very, very difficult to do that. But I think that happens at the individual checklist too. I've talked many times about a particular scenario where I was talking to a business owner where they needed to free up their time. And they needed to, one of the processes was sending quotes to customers, and it was taking them 15 hours a week to do it. And I said, well, and they said, look, Alexis, I know I should have documented it as a checklist and hand it over. Like, we'd had enough conversations, he'd seen me speak at events and so on. And he said, but I just, I haven't managed to make the time. I figure it would take me about 8 hours, and I just haven't found the time. And I said on that call, like, we've got 45 minutes left of the call, let's see what we can do. And in less than 30 minutes, we got all the high-level steps done and the key guidance in the key areas. And I think the blocker, when you make it about everything, is that suddenly it's, that's an 8-hour task, I better put that off because it's going to take a long time to get the return on investment. Rather than starting with exactly as you've set out, like, get the high-level steps in, put a little bit of guidance in. Now the whole thing is 5 to 30 minutes, rather than hours and hours. And then that becomes something, it's like, well, the likelihood of you getting the return on that investment on that time, like if you're putting less than 30 minutes into creating a checklist to hand over a task, hopefully you've picked something that is taking you, more than 30 minutes over a sensible period, a week, 2 weeks, a month, a quarter, and therefore you will get that return on investment of the time, but not necessarily if you're putting hours and hours and hours into it. And I think that's really cool. So let's say, we've got our high-level steps, we've added some guidance in where it's needed. It's not necessarily easy for the owner to know quite how much is needed, like where to draw the line. So what do we do next? How do we get to a point where it's going to be sufficient, and or even if they've misjudged it, what can they do?
Well, this is. Is this the most important? Yeah, I'd say the title is where things go wrong straight from the get go. But this final step is the one that cannot be missed, and it is to test it and then iterate on it. There's a fantastic book called the Checklist Manifesto. You'd guess that me and Alexis would like a book called Checklist Manifesto. It's an awesome book. It's a really light read. You can pick it up and read it on an airplane journey or a couple of hours, and it's all focused on stories. And it's written by a guy who's a surgeon, and so there's loads of case studies of how they're using it in hospitals for really life or death moments. And he goes into industries where the checklist that we're doing now in our white collar jobs are helping us to become more efficient and grow our businesses faster. But he's going to places where if they get it wrong, it's a complete disaster. And so these industries learned about this many decades ago, such as building industries, making sure that you don't make any mistakes when you're putting up a skyscraper. He's saying that with surgeons, they actually learned it scarily late, and it is a shocker what people forget to do, and they introduce these checklists. But he went in his own research and learned from the airline industries and about training their pilots. And so they had this a guy working for was it British Airways or one of the big airlines, and they are creating checklists for what their pilots need to do when the shit hits the fan. And when the shit hits the fan and you're in an airplane and you're the pilot, it's really hitting the fan. It's not a good place to be. And so they find that, you have to have these super clear checklists, and they have to be really short. So we're talking checklists like 3 steps, and I think that might have been the max 3 steps. But what the guy said, that when we introduce a new checklist, the one thing that you can say with absolute certainty is that it's not, there's something wrong with it. There is something wrong with it which will cause the person following it to make a mistake, misinterpret what's required. And this is, someone whose full-time job is to write checklists for people who, if that goes wrong, will die, along with everyone else in the back of the plane. And they know it will always, always, always have some issue in it. And so what do? Well, they put it in a simulator, they see what happens, they test it with a load of people, and they go, yes. Yeah, we need to make that step way more clearer, or change that wording, or we forgot about the need that in this eventuality, this button is in the wrong place, or whatever. And it's the same when we're trying to delegate something to a member of the team. We forget something which is no longer an issue for us, or doesn't pop into our mind. It might be, they're going to need login details to this website. Or, yes, I'm asking you to do a task where you will need some additional training in that area because you've never used that tool or anything else. And so you identify those mistakes by testing it. And you might do a test run yourself. For example, we had the repurposing your podcast one. I did a couple of laps myself to identify things which caused me pain points, and then test it with the people who are using it. And ideally, you can do that with them so that they get to ask the questions. But a number of different ways you can do that. All you need to know for sure is there will be issues. So at the point where you finish writing it, it is not a done job. It's a done job when it's actually been delegated and someone's using it consistently, and you no longer have to do it. For me, the podcast is now a done job, because after fixing 3 or 4 issues that confused the hell out of the team, it's now in a place where literally I finish doing the podcast, I tell them where the recording is, and I'm done. And it pops up in 20 different places. And that's where you want to get to, but you've got to test and iterate. That's the big one.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it reminds me of a couple of things. So one is, as you say, like doing that as soon as you've drafted, if you like, it's drafted your checklist, and testing and iterating it, and sitting with the person and getting them to follow it where you're not doing the doing. I think the mistake is often, I'll show you, this is how I do it, you watch me. And instead it's like, no, you've created the checklist, you watch them. Because you'll see the misunderstandings, you'll see the mistakes that they make, and so on. You'll go, whoa, no, don't do that. And they'll go, why? And you go, sorry, there should be a step in there that says, first you need to do this, or first you should check these things. And it's that moment where you then suddenly go, right, update the checklist, that mistake never happens, that misunderstanding that never happens, that question that you asked me, I never get asked again. And what's really powerful is that you do it immediately, but actually you can do that over time as well. So for example, in the Paddy, that you just gave there with sharing the podcast episode and repurposing and so on, I got a message from awesome entrepreneur who's particularly really good at the way in which she uses social media. It's Nish, if you're listening, thank you very much. And she sent me a message saying, for your posts on Instagram, you can make it easier to see what's the content for the videos by putting a cover on it. Now, full disclosure, I have no idea what she's talking about. I have a vague idea. I understand what a cover is, and I can imagine what she's doing, but I don't then go, yes, I know how to do this. But the great thing is I can raise that as an issue and for the team, and it'll just get reviewed, worked out, and put into the process. And so suddenly, that idea, even just an idea from someone who is giving a good suggestion, can just feed in nicely. And so I love that as a thing. I think the other thing that it made me think of, and when particularly in talking about some of the examples from Checklist Manifesto, is I'm often asked by business owners and their teams is, do we have to follow the checklist every time? At what point do we go, well, we kind of know how to do it. I've got the experience, I've got a clever team, and once they've done it a lot of times, can't I just not follow it? And it makes me think I've got a friend who's a fighter pilot, and as we know, in the airline industry, they're particularly good at some of this stuff. And so he explained how they kind of have their training manual to learn how to do all the things that they need to do, the long stuff. And then they have their operational checklist of, okay, here's the things that we need to do before we take off. And the question, it's like, you're a really experienced fighter pilot, you fly jets, you do all this kind of stuff. Do you follow the checklist every time? And I'm paraphrasing, but the answer is only the times I want the plane to remain in the sky. And it's like the answer that I now give to business owners and their teams when they say, do I have to follow the checklist every time? The answer is only if getting the right result matters. Like only if doing it right matters. And of course, then you can sit back and go, yeah, that's probably every time then. Because making a mistake is often so painful and derailing and slow, and yet following a checklist is quick. We've all been on holiday where you kind of go, oh no, I forgot swimming trunks, or I forgot this. And as a result, the derail that it creates for you, like suddenly you're not able to go jump in the pool and instead have to now go and do some searching and find a shop and go do that and da-da-da-da-da. And suddenly a half a second, like something that might have taken you an additional 2 seconds, 3 seconds to just have a checklist of my packing list to go on holiday, becomes something that's derailed your holiday by a couple of hours or more. And I think that's the mindset of how to use it. So I love that. The testing and iterating phase, so important, exactly as you say, but it's almost a continuous journey, right? It's almost like it'll never be done forever. Like at the point that you're creating your checklists as PDFs or laminating or whatever, it's like, really? Is that it? Have you decided that this is the best you'll ever be as a business? And I think, that's one of the reasons why we built a manual where you can like make changes easily and yet not by accident, like you would like in a Microsoft Word document or something like that. Cool. Excellent. We're coming up for time, so let's do a bit of a recap and summary before we close out the episode. Any other thoughts that you want to cover before we move to an end, Paddy?
No, I think now I love the additional examples to really bring that to life. It's such a game changer when you've got this tool in your tool belt and can start using it again and again. So good stuff.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, so in summary, how do you create checklists that your team will love? Firstly, make sure you're using an action-orientated title and steps to make it clear both what the document's about and the scope, and also what you're going to do in each of those steps. Then add guidance only where it's really needed. Don't make this an hours and hours and hours long task. You can keep it in a few minutes and get the return on investment quickly. And then don't forget to test and iterate so that you make sure that your team understand it, they don't make mistakes, rather than assuming that once you've documented, it's done. Now, as our regular listeners will know, we do run a weekly webinar. It's on how to free up 15 hours a week and remove the constant stress of running a business without slowing down growth. I'm going to be running it the coming Wednesday at 1 p.m. UK time. Please do join. You can register and find out more at www.airmanual.co/webinar. And a final note for those listening on LinkedIn or on our podcast, please do share this podcast with other people that you think might find it useful. Please do post comments, replies, and of course reviews. Taking 1 minute to do a review of the podcast really helps us get more visibility, help more people, and ultimately that's what we're about, so that we can help them reduce the stress of running a business, which is so important. So otherwise, until next time, have fun.